Fiona Blackwood's scream echoed through the empty homestead as labor pains gripped her body one final time. Outside, the merciless Colorado winter of 1878 howled against the walls of her small cabin near Fort Garland, the frozen landscape as unforgiving as the judgment that had driven her from town 6 months earlier. When the crying of her newborn son filled the room, Fiona collapsed back onto her sweat-soaked sheets, alone in a moment that should have been shared. "You're perfect," she whispered through tears, cradling the infant against her chest. "No matter what they say." 3 days later, wrapped in every blanket she could spare, Fiona trudged through knee-deep snow toward Fort Garland with her infant son pressed tightly against her chest. The supplies she'd carefully rationed had dwindled faster than expected. Without help, they wouldn't survive another week. The bell above Wilkins' general store jingled as she entered, the warmth inside momentarily comforting until she noticed the immediate silence. Mrs. Wilkins stood behind the counter, her expression hardening as her eyes fell to the bundle in Fiona's arms. "We don't serve your kind here, Mrs. Wilkins said, her voice carrying through the store. "Take your sin and leave." Fiona clutched her son tighter. "Please, I need supplies. I have money. Your money's no good. We know what happened with Sheriff Taylor's son before he left for Denver. That child is born of sin." The whispers around the store grew louder. Matthew Taylor had indeed courted Fiona last spring, making promises of marriage before disappearing when she told him she was with child. His father, the sheriff, had made sure everyone knew she was a fallen woman, unworthy of their charity. "My son needs milk and I need food," Fiona pleaded, her voice breaking. "We'll die out there." "Perhaps that's God's judgment," an older woman muttered from the corner. The store's door opened, bringing with it a blast of cold air and the imposing figure of a man Fiona had never seen before. Tall and broad-shouldered, he stomped snow from his boots before removing his hat, revealing dark hair streaked with premature silver at the temples. His eyes, a striking shade of blue, surveyed the scene with quiet intensity. "Is there a problem here?" His deep voice resonated through the silent store. Mrs. Wilkins straightened her back. "Nothing that concerns outsiders, mister. Just dealing with local matters." The stranger's gaze fell on Fiona, taking in her exhausted appearance and the small bundle in her arms. Without hesitation, he approached the counter. "I'll take whatever the lady needs and add it to my order," he said, placing a small sack of coins on the counter. "And I'll pay extra for it to be loaded on my wagon without delay." "Now listen here," Mrs. Wilkins began. "Nash. Liam Nash." He leaned forward slightly. "And I'm not asking." Something in his tone made Mrs. Wilkins pause before reluctantly nodding. "What supplies will you be needing, Miss Blackwood?" she asked, her voice cold. As Fiona listed what she needed, her baby began to fuss. She gently rocked him, but the crying grew louder. Without warning, Liam Nash extended his arms. "May I? I had younger siblings," he explained, his expression softening. Hesitantly, Fiona handed over her son. With practiced ease, Nash cradled the infant, swaying slightly as he hummed a low tune. Miraculously, the baby quieted. "What's his name?" Nash asked. "James," Fiona replied, surprised at the tenderness this rough-looking stranger showed her child. "Strong name." Nash smiled down at the baby. "Hello there, James. Aren't you a handsome little man?" Once the supplies were loaded, Nash helped Fiona onto his wagon. "Where to?" he asked. "The old Miller homestead, about 3 miles north," she answered, uncertain why this stranger was helping her. As they traveled, Nash explained that he'd purchased land near Fort Garland to raise horses, having spent years as a cavalry scout. He'd only arrived in town 2 days prior and knew nothing of Fiona's situation. "People are quick to judge what they don't understand," he said as they approached her cabin. "I've learned that a person's worth isn't determined by others' opinions." Before leaving, Nash ensured her fireplace was well stocked with wood. "I'll check on you in a few days," he promised. Winter's no time to be alone with a newborn. True to his word, Nash returned 3 days later with more supplies and a small wooden cradle he'd crafted himself. "Every boy needs a proper place to sleep," he said, placing it near the fire. These visits continued through January, each one longer than the last. Nash would chop wood, make repairs to the cabin, and often prepare meals while Fiona tended to James. They spoke of their lives, Nash's years in the cavalry, his dreams of breeding horses, and Fiona's childhood in Missouri before moving west with her now-deceased parents. She never mentioned Matthew Taylor, and Nash never asked about James's father. Instead, he marveled at the baby's growth, bringing small gifts and speaking to him as if he were a person of importance. "You've been so kind," Fiona said one evening as they sat before the fire, James sleeping peacefully in his cradle. "Why help us when everyone else turned away?" Nash was quiet for a moment, watching the flames. "When I first saw you in that store, holding your son while those people looked at you like you were nothing, it reminded me of my sister." His voice grew softer. "She had a child young, unwed. Our father threw her out. I was away with the cavalry when it happened. By the time I found her." He didn't finish the sentence. "I'm sorry," Fiona whispered. "Your son is a gift, Fiona, not a sin. Anyone who can't see that isn't worth your concern." Nash stood to leave, donning his coat. "I believe we get second chances in this life if we're brave enough to take them." As February thawed into March, Fiona found herself watching the horizon each day, anticipating Nash's visits. James, now nearly 3 months old, would brighten at the sound of Nash's voice, reaching tiny hands toward him whenever he appeared. One afternoon, Nash arrived with an unexpected proposal. "I need help with my ranch," he stated matter-of-factly. "The spring foals will be coming soon, and I could use an extra pair of hands. There's a small house on the property, nothing fancy, but it's closer to town and better built than this place." Fiona hesitated. "People will talk if I move on to your land." "People always talk," Nash replied with a shrug. "But they tend to forget when there's fresher gossip. Besides, it's a proper job with fair pay." The thought of leaving the isolation of the homestead was tempting. James deserved more than this lonely existence, and Nash had proven himself trustworthy. The next week, Nash brought his wagon and helped Fiona pack her meager belongings. As they left the cabin behind, Fiona felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. Nash's property sat on a verdant stretch of land with a view of the mountains. The small house he'd mentioned was indeed modest, but far sturdier than her cabin, with 2 rooms and a proper stove. Most importantly, it stood only a short walk from Nash's larger home, where his stable of horses grazed in a fenced pasture. "It's beautiful," Fiona breathed, taking in the landscape. "It needs work," Nash admitted, "but it has potential." Life on Nash's ranch quickly fell into a comfortable rhythm. While Fiona tended to household matters and cared for James, she also learned to help with the horses. Nash proved to be a patient teacher, showing her how to recognize each animal's temperament and needs. By April, word had spread through Fort Garland that Nash had hired the disgraced Fiona Blackwood. The whispers followed them when they ventured into town for supplies, but Nash seemed impervious to the stares and muttered comments. He conducted his business with a polite but firm demeanor that discouraged direct confrontation. On a warm afternoon in late spring, Fiona was hanging laundry when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Expecting Nash, she was startled to see Sheriff Taylor riding toward her, his expression grim. "Miss Blackwood," he greeted her stiffly, dismounting. "I need to speak with you about my son." Fiona's heart raced as she instinctively moved toward the house where James was napping. "What about him?" Matthews returned to Fort Garland. "He's heard about the child." The sheriff removed his hat, revealing gray hair that matched his son's. "He wants to see the boy." "No," Fiona said immediately. "Matthew made his choice when he abandoned us. James is my son." "That child has Taylor blood," the sheriff insisted, his voice hardening. "Matthew's willing to make things right. He'll marry you. Give the boy a proper name." "Too late for that." Nash's voice cut through the tension as he approached from the stables, a rifle casually held at his side. "Fiona and James don't need Matthew's charity now." Sheriff Taylor turned, his hand instinctively moving toward his pistol before thinking better of it. "This isn't your concern, Nash. Anyone threatening people who work my land makes it my concern." Nash moved to stand beside Fiona. "Matthew had his chance. He chose to run. A man doesn't get to claim fatherhood when it's convenient." The sheriff's jaw tightened. "Matthew's family is respected in this county. He could provide for the boy, give him opportunities. James has everything he needs," Fiona replied, finding courage in Nash's presence. "Please tell Matthew that while I appreciate his sudden interest, we're doing fine without him." After the sheriff departed, Fiona sat heavily on the porch steps, trembling slightly. "He'll be back," she said quietly. "The Taylors aren't used to being refused." Nash settled beside her, his rifle propped against the railing. "Then we'll be ready. But Fiona, if you want Matthew to be part of James's life, I won't stand in the way." Fiona looked at him in surprise. "Why would I want that? Matthew called my pregnancy a mistake, said it would ruin his future in politics. He offered money to take care of it before he left." Her voice caught. "James deserves better than a father who saw him as an inconvenience." Nash's expression darkened, but he simply nodded. "Then that's what James will have." 2 days later, Matthew Taylor himself arrived at the ranch, better dressed than Fiona remembered, and with the same charming smile that had once captivated her. Nash was in town delivering horses, leaving Fiona to face her former suitor alone. "Fiona, you're looking well," Matthew greeted her, all confidence and practiced charm. "May I see my son?" Fiona stood in the doorway, blocking his view into the house where James lay in his cradle. "He's sleeping. And he's not your son, Matthew. You made that clear when you left." Matthew's smile faltered. "I was young and frightened. I've had time to think about my responsibilities. Father says the boy needs his family name. His name is James Blackwood, and he has everything he needs." Matthew's charm slipped further, revealing the petulant young man she'd come to know in their final days together. "You're living on a ranch with another man, Fiona. People talk. What kind of life is that for my child?" "A good one," she replied firmly. "With people who love him." "Love?" Matthew laughed coldly. "Is that what Nash offers? Do you think a man like him wants to raise another man's bastard out of the goodness of his heart? He's using you, Fiona." The accusation stung because it echoed Fiona's own unspoken fears. Nash had never expressed romantic intentions, and she'd been careful not to misinterpret his kindness. Still, she wouldn't give Matthew the satisfaction of seeing her doubt. "Please leave, Matthew. James and I are happy here." His expression hardened. "This isn't over. My father has influence with the territorial judge. If you won't be reasonable, we'll petition for custody. No court will choose an unwed mother over a respectable family." After Matthew left, Fiona gathered James in her arms and wept, terrified by the threat. When Nash returned that evening, he found her still clutching the baby, eyes red-rimmed from crying. "Matthew came," she explained haltingly. "He threatened to take James through the courts." Nash's expression remained calm, though his eyes flashed with anger. "Let me speak to him." "No," Fiona exclaimed. "The Taylors have connections. I can't risk losing James. Maybe we should leave Fort Garland, go somewhere they can't find us." Nash knelt before her chair, gently placing a hand on her arm. "Running isn't the answer, Fiona. You've done nothing wrong, and neither has James." "The law doesn't always protect people like me," she whispered. "Then we'll find another way." Nash's voice was steady, reassuring. "I won't let them take your son." The next morning, Nash rode into town alone. He returned hours later, his expression unreadable as he asked Fiona to join him on the porch. "I spoke with Matthew Taylor," he began, watching her closely. "And then with Judge Parker. I laid out the situation plainly." Fiona's heart sank. "And will there be a custody hearing?" "No," Nash replied. "There won't be any legal proceedings, but I had to make certain. Arrangements." "What kind of arrangements?" Nash took a deep breath. "I told the judge I intended to marry you, if you'd have me. That James would be raised as my son, with my name." Fiona stared at him, speechless. "You? What?" "It's a practical solution," Nash continued, his usual confidence wavering slightly. "The judge respects marriage more than Matthew's belated claims of fatherhood. If we wed, the Taylors would have no legal standing." "You're proposing marriage as a practical solution?" Fiona asked, uncertain whether to laugh or cry. Nash ran a hand through his hair, suddenly looking boyishly nervous. "I'm making a mess of this. The truth is, Fiona, I've grown to care deeply for you and James. These past months have been the happiest I've known in years. I wasn't planning to speak so soon, but Matthew forced my hand. So this is just to protect us from Matthew?" "No," Nash said firmly, taking her hands in his. "This is because I love you. Both of you. James isn't a burden to me, he's a gift. I've thought of him as my son since the day I first held him in that store." Tears welled in Fiona's eyes. "Liam, I can't let you sacrifice your future for us." "Sacrifice?" Nash smiled gently. "Fiona, Having you and James in my life is the opposite of sacrifice. It's everything I never knew I wanted." He paused, studying her face. Unless your heart lies elsewhere." Fiona shook her head, a tear sliding down her cheek. "My heart has been yours since you stood up for us in the general store. I just never dared hope you might feel the same." Nash's smile broadened as he tentatively leaned forward, giving her time to withdraw if she wished. When she didn't, he kissed her softly, a promise of tenderness and respect. "Is that a yes?" he asked when they parted. "Yes," Fiona whispered. "Though people will say you married a fallen woman." "Let them talk," Nash replied, gathering her close. "We know the truth. And one day, James will know that he brought us together, the greatest gift either of us could have received." They were married the following Sunday in a small ceremony at Judge Parker's home, with only the judge's wife and the local doctor as witnesses. James, dressed in his finest clothes, was held by the doctor's wife during the brief exchange of vows. As they signed the marriage certificate, the judge cleared his throat. "Mr. Nash has also filed adoption papers for the child," he explained, presenting another document. "Once approved, the boy will legally be James Nash." Fiona looked at Liam in surprise. He smiled gently. "Only if you agree. I thought it would provide extra protection against any future claims." Through tears of gratitude, Fiona signed the adoption petition. As they left the judge's home, now legally a family, Liam lifted James from the doctor's wife's arms. "Well, young man," he said to the infant, "I believe we have a bright future ahead of us." The Taylors' threats faded as news of the marriage spread through Fort Garland. Matthew, unwilling to challenge Nash directly, returned to Denver within a week. Sheriff Taylor maintained a cold distance, but made no further attempts to interfere with their family. By summer's end, Liam's horse breeding business was thriving. The first foals born under his care were proving exceptional, drawing buyers from as far as Santa Fe. Fiona, now fully comfortable with the horses, had developed a particular talent for working with the more skittish mares. On a warm evening in September, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and crimson, Liam wrapped an arm around Fiona's shoulders. "I've been thinking about expanding," he said. "There's good land available to the west. We could build a larger house, maybe add cattle to our operation." Fiona nestled against him, content. "I like the sound of that. James will need space to run as he grows. And perhaps room for brothers or sisters someday," Liam suggested cautiously. Fiona smiled, taking his hand and placing it gently on her stomach. "Sooner than you might think." Liam's eyes widened. "Are you certain?" She nodded, her eyes shining. "Dr. Collins confirmed it yesterday. By spring, James will have a sibling." Liam gathered her into his arms, his joy evident in the tender kiss he pressed to her forehead. "Another gift from heaven," he whispered. 5 years later, the Nash Ranch had grown into one of the most successful operations in the San Luis Valley. Their new home, a spacious 2-story structure, stood proudly on a hill overlooking pastures where prize horses grazed alongside a small herd of cattle. James, now a spirited 5-year-old with his mother's auburn hair and his adoptive father's blue eyes, raced around the yard with his 3-year-old brother, Thomas. 7-month-old Rebecca watched from Fiona's lap on the porch, gurgling happily at her brother's antics. "Careful with your sister," Liam called as James tried to show the baby a frog he'd caught. "She likes it, Pop," James protested, though he gently moved the creature further from Rebecca's grabbing hands. Fiona smiled at Liam as he settled beside her on the porch swing. "He's so much like you sometimes. I forget he didn't come from you." Liam watched the boy with undisguised pride. "He's my son in every way that matters." He took Fiona's hand, his thumb tracing the wedding band he'd placed there years before. "I thank God every day for bringing you both into my life." Their peaceful moment was interrupted by the approach of a rider. As the figure drew closer, Fiona tensed, recognizing Sheriff Taylor. Liam stood protectively as the sheriff dismounted. "Taylor," he greeted neutrally. "What brings you to our home?" The sheriff, older now and more weathered, removed his hat. "Nash." He nodded at Fiona. "Mrs. Nash, I'm not here on official business." An uncomfortable silence stretched between them until the sheriff spoke again. "I received word from Denver yesterday. My son Matthew passed away last week. Influenza." Fiona gasped softly, instinctively gathering Rebecca closer. Though she had no love left for Matthew, the news of his death was shocking. "I'm sorry for your loss," Liam offered genuinely. Sheriff Taylor nodded, his gaze drifting to James, who had stopped playing to watch the stranger. "Before he died, Matthew asked me to make things right. He regretted his actions regarding the boy." The sheriff reached into his coat and withdrew an envelope. "He left a letter for James, to be given to him when he's older, and a bank draft in his name. It's not much, but Matthew wanted him to have something." Fiona looked to Liam, uncertain. He nodded slightly, leaving the decision to her. "Thank you," she said finally, accepting the envelope. "We'll keep it for when James is old enough to understand." The sheriff's eyes lingered on James. "He has Taylor eyes," he commented quietly. "With respect," Liam said firmly, "he has Nash eyes now. But we won't hide his history from him when the time comes." Sheriff Taylor nodded again, replacing his hat. "That's fair." He hesitated before adding, "You've built a fine family, Nash. Perhaps better than my son could have provided." After the sheriff departed, Fiona and Liam sat in contemplative silence, watching their children resume their play. The envelope lay between them, a connection to a past that seemed increasingly distant. "We'll tell him when he's ready," Liam said, covering Fiona's hand with his. "About Matthew, about how we met, all of it. He should know where he came from. And where he belongs," Fiona added, leaning against her husband's shoulder. "With us." As twilight descended on their ranch, Liam called the children for supper. James ran ahead, while Liam scooped up Thomas in one arm and wrapped the other around Fiona, who carried Rebecca. "I still remember the first time I saw you," Liam said quietly as they walked toward their home. "Standing in that store, holding James, surrounded by people who couldn't see what I saw immediately." "And what was that?" Fiona asked, though she'd heard this story many times. Liam smiled, the love in his eyes as bright as it had been on their wedding day. "A woman of extraordinary courage and a child who was never a sin, but always a blessing." He kissed her softly before adding, "The beginning of my family." Inside their home, as they gathered around the table, 3 children and 2 parents bound by love rather than merely blood, Fiona offered a silent prayer of gratitude. For the stranger who had seen value where others saw shame. For the man who had chosen to be a father when another had fled the responsibility. For the husband who had transformed rejection into redemption. In a land as harsh as the Colorado Territory, where judgment came easily and forgiveness rarely, they had found something precious. A family forged by choice rather than circumstance, stronger for the challenges they had overcome together. That night, after the children were tucked into bed, Fiona and Liam stood on their porch under a canopy of stars. "Do you ever regret it?" Fiona asked softly. "Taking on another man's responsibilities?" Liam turned to her, framing her face with gentle hands. "From the moment I saw you holding James in that store, there was never a question in my mind. Some men spend their whole lives searching for purpose. I found mine the day I found you both." As they stood embraced beneath the vast western sky, Fiona understood that sometimes family wasn't what you were born into, but what you built together, choice by choice, day by day, love by enduring love.